So the double feature is that asshole at work and taking a stand or activism. And for reasons that will become clear a bit later, I'm going to spend a little more time on that asshole at work. And then I'm going to invite Kate Waters to join me for some of the applications about taking a stand and activism. So why are we talking about that asshole at work? Well, let me just ask you real quickly. Put your hand up in the air if you've ever dealt with an asshole at work, just real quick. Has it ever happened? Oh, wow, huh? Aren't we in great company? Keep your hand up if you ever were the asshole at work. Just kidding. I love the disclosure. We're at 100% here. You know, if you are in a meat suit and you ever interact with other people in meat suits and there's anything valuable happening in the interaction, you are gonna run into an asshole in your life. You're maybe even gonna, as you guys have alluded, be the asshole at some point in your life. And some of you might be saying like, well, geez, Rebecca, in Zen, Zen people probably don't have problems with assholes. Zen people, like they probably don't get triggered. That's all bullshit. Even the most enlightened Zen master deals with assholes, gets triggered by assholes. Some Zen masters are assholes from time to time. Generally, they're trying to do it for good reason, but still, they can really come across as assholes. We've got one person on the screen today who last weekend at this time, she was just ending a turn being the jiki, sort of the hall monitor for an all weekend sit, basically a long training session. And she was really getting the haterade from people who were training with her because they were just in their minds, they were screaming, ring the bell, end the sit. So that person was kind of seen as, the asshole in that session. So the truth is, if you're going to do anything in your life that involves other people and there's ever anything at stake, there is the opportunity to deal with that asshole at work. But I want to put this in context, in the Zen context. What is this really about? What is this really about when we talk about that asshole at work? If we break this down, the first thing we see is a separation, right? So we talk a lot in Zen about the delusion of separation, and the big ones are mind, body, life, death. But one of the other big ones is self and other. And I've returned to this theme again and again in my series of talks, whether I was talking about killing house plants or, trying to deal with the dog that was just crying through the night and I ended up returning to the pound, right? One of the big delusions is self and other. So one of the things we can notice for ourselves is if we are referring to another as an asshole, that's our first signal to ourselves that we're sensing a separation. We're sensing a separation. And I want to encourage you to, if you don't yet, have maybe a pen and a pencil handy, because we're going to do a little exercise as we're cruising along here this afternoon to go deeper into this for yourself. So the first sort of Zen offering to this is that notion of separation, right? And separation is a mind-made condition. It's a mind-made condition in a Zen context. And what is the opposite of that? Well, the opposite of that is interpenetration or pure connection, just pure connection. So we're going to talk about this separation versus connection. But the second thing that Zen brings to this is, just even the word asshole, there's it's not a neutral word. It's not a neutral word. It's charged, isn't it? That asshole at work, that asshole I had to deal with today. And the charge around that word tells us something in a Zen context as well. And what it tells me, in my experience, is that there's some fear involved. There's some fear involved. So I want to share, I call this the fear tree. I don't know what Ginny calls it, but this fear tree, I took this is a photo from my actual book. This is page 122 in Ginny's latest book called Resonate. But take a look at this here, right? If you want to look at the left third there, assholes are usually people, right? So if we look at the third of the tree over there that's people, and boy, do those first few bubbles, those are words we would put on that asshole. Self-centered, abrasive, can't trust them. Maybe they're passive or they're resisting you, right? And you keep going down the branches of those fruits of the tree there and read through some of these things. What's behind those words like self-centered, passive, angry? I'm sick of appeasing other people, right? So think about your favorite asshole, your favorite anecdote about an asshole that you had to deal with. Which of these branches apply to this person? Can't count on them is another branch of this tree. I have to protect myself, another branch of the tree. I'm being attacked, yet another branch of the tree leading to those asshole fruits. And now we come to the trunk of the tree. The trunk of the tree. I won't succeed. This is a person who maybe is standing in your way of being successful. It's interesting the number of people who leave their jobs because of their manager, right? So maybe their manager becomes the jerk who prevents them from succeeding or undermines them or doesn't seem to be giving them opportunities, right? Another part of the trunk of the tree is I can't stand up to this. There are people who are just so strong, in their offensiveness that they wear you down to a nub. And eventually you just are like, ugh, you just shrug like, I'm done fighting this fight. I want to give it up. Look further at the branch or at the trunk of the tree there. I may lose my job. I can't be myself. I'm not smart, or I'm not good enough, right? So those are the branches of the tree. And then you get down into the root system, right? This is where the roots of fear are. I'm not strong. I'm not good enough, beautiful enough, whatever the case is. I don't feel safe with this person. This person really makes me feel unsafe. I can't be authentic, or I'm not authentic or creative enough, or this person just doesn't like me. This person doesn't love me. I am not worthy of being loved. When you look at this fear tree and you think about your own asshole, think about your asshole, which branches of the tree and parts of the root are showing up for you? Because what's usually happening is this asshole is reflecting something in ourselves, right? But we're putting these attributes onto this other person because of something we're having a hard time facing within ourselves. So I wonder, let's backtrack just a little bit. I want to start with just opening up the floor and asking if any of you would be willing to share an anecdote of your interaction with an asshole. Like, what was happening? How was this asshole behavior manifesting itself? The reason I ask is because I think there's a little bit of comfort with each other and just sharing, like, oh wow, that we're not the only ones who deal with assholes at work. Would anybody be willing to share without naming names? Adriana, go ahead. You know, What's interesting in each of these stories is that there's a visceralness to it. Adriana talks specifically about the hair standing up on the back of her neck, right? Another one of our anecdotes um, was able to discern like the difference between being between asking a question and being questioned, and that has a one of those things is very self-centered and another one of those things is very open and curious. And then this final piece about wanting to protect children's safety. That is so visceral. That is so visceral within so many of us, especially parents, to want to protect, children. And I want to pause there for a second on the visceral nature of assholes. Because one of the things that Zen can help bring to this is your embodied sense of interactions with other people. Your embodied sense of interactions with other people. Your body is constantly giving you intelligence. And as we sit longer, our auditory abilities become more and more nuanced. All of our senses become more and more nuanced as we sit quietly, we train hard, we can pick up on things. But traditionally, we only think of the five senses. We don't also, at least in Western culture, think of the intuitive nature of our body. And some of us don't even register that information. Some of us do very naturally, but for some of us, that emerges over time with this work in Zen. So I want to reinforce that there's a whole bunch of intelligence around people that is available to you if you can tune in, if you can drop in and just honor and pay attention to what your body is telling you, the intelligence that your body is telling you. And you know that there are many really good physiological reasons for that, that we are showing that your stomach is your second brain with the number of neuron connections and so forth. So your body has its own intelligence. And one of the things that Zen practice does is it sensitizes us to be able to pick up on a lot more information. Gordon Green Roshi and Ken Kushner Roshi used to do medical doctor training. That was a lot of what they did together for a long time. And they would do an exercise with every group of residents that they trained, where they would ask the residents to leave the room, and then they would have to walk up to the room and knock on the door as if they were going to come into a patient room. And what you could determine about the residents' condition, their mental condition, their physical condition, just by listening to the knock on the door. Just by listening to the knock on the door. And Green Roshi tells a story about how one young resident, the knock on the door literally stopped his blood cold. And it became for him like, whoa, how can we either really correct this physician's in training, their mode, or how do we get this person off the physician track? Like, it was so clear just from that one interaction, that rap on the door, what the person's condition was. So your body has a bunch of intelligence about dealing with people. Use that intelligence. Here's another thing that you can use from an embodied perspective with that asshole at work is when you're in a neutral situation, when you're not highly activated and highly charged up about this person, let your body mirror their body. You don't have to be, like overt about this, but if they're slouching in the chair, you slouch in the chair. If they're hunched over, you hunch over. If they have a furrowed brow, you furrow your brow. And just mirroring some of what their body is doing will help you make the connection to their condition. Because if you can make a connection to their condition, you will be more effective, right? So again, you have to do this in a neutral situation when you're not activated, but to just be able to hold their posture and try to embody what they're embodying, it can give you a ton of information about their, physical, psychosocial condition. And um, along the same line here, so we talked about your body is a way to connect to the information that this person is giving you. You can actually use your body to try to match, and that can give you a sense of connection. But there's something even much deeper than that, which is on the level of human behavior, on the level of, just traditional work situations. It is helpful to remember that we are all suffering. Every single one of us. To be a human being is to know suffering. Sometimes when I'm stuck in traffic, there's an intersection a few blocks from my house, and it's been torn up. It's a really weird intersection. It's not easy to get through when there's not construction, but right now it's changing all the time. Everyone tries to avoid this intersection, but occasionally I can't avoid it. It is like the way I have to go to get, so I'm always backed up in traffic. And one of the things I like to do is to check out the people who are in the other vehicles around me, because I think of them as all being in their own bubble. They literally are traveling in their own car bubble, But here are all of these stories around me, all of these life situations, people telling themselves their own stories about what their life is like. And it's so fascinating, what you can pick up from just how people are sitting at the wheel. If you can tell if somebody's having a bad day, you can tell if somebody's having a pretty good day. Those people who are like doing their car dancing, like, you want some of that, you want to draft off of that. But the point being is that every single human is having this two-legged meat suit existence, which, as the Buddha said, is suffering, And so to help humanize our assholes, sometimes it's helpful to think that they too are suffering. One of the most interesting things I've heard or read recently about this very issue, sometimes I like examples of extremes. And I found this extreme example of dealing with an asshole. And it comes from this book called The Buddhist on Death Row. And it's a story of, I'll just give you a little bit of context and then I'm going to play the clip. So the Buddhist who's on death row, his name is Jarvis. And in this little clip, I'm going to play you about his own dealing with an asshole at work. When he says tier, it's the row of cells in his cell block in prison. He is on death row. This is his story being told by another author, but Jarvis, the main character, is himself. He's a real person. And Jarvis himself is also a writer. So sometimes you will hear the narrator, the author, refer to something that Jarvis has written. Con is short for convict. It's how people refer to each other, like he's a con, she's a con, how they refer to each other in prison. And just for a little bit of context, by this time in this story that I'm about to play you, this is 2/3 of the way through the book, Jarvis has been sitting in meditation and doing Tonglen meditation, which is Pema Chodron has kind of made Tonglen really popular in our time. He's been doing Tonglen meditation for 2 decades. And he's already taken the Bodhisattva vow, and his teacher, who, did his vow ceremony with him in prison when he was already on death row, gave him this protective force that was important in their lineage. We don't resonate with this in our lineage, but red Tara. Red Tara is the protective force that his teacher gave him when he faced difficulty. He was to call on red Tara. So I'm going to play you. It's a couple of minutes long, and this is the biggest asshole at work story I could think of, I could find.
One late night, Jarvis began a new story. He'd been struggling to make sense of an experience he'd had with an inmate who'd been in a cell down the tier for 6 months or so. He knew the man as Bork. Footnote: Bork is a pseudonym. They often talked and played chess. Generally, men on the row didn't ask one another about their crimes. It was better not to know. But that week, Jarvis heard men talking about Bork. One said Bork was on death row because he'd raped and killed children. Jarvis was sickened. He'd been playing chess with a child killer. Even among the killers on death row, Khans reserved special enmity for anyone who hurt a child. Over the years, some had been killed. Jarvis felt nausea, disgust, fury, and hatred so intense it consumed him. Jarvis imagined Bork's victims. The visions were unbearably vivid, and the victims' shattered parents, their wailing grief. He tried to quell his fury with Tonglen meditation, but it didn't work. In fact, the images only became sharper. So did his anger. In Jarvis's story, he expressed his repulsion and his failed attempts to make peace with the fact that he lived down the tier from a child killer. The sound of Bork's voice boot-kicked me further out into the dirty sea of my own pain, where I risked drowning in hatred. He said he felt as if he were living a few cells from Satan. He evoked Red Tara, his protectress, but even she didn't help him comprehend sickness so deep and absolute that it could cause a human being like Bork to prey upon children. He wrote that it felt as if I were undergoing spiritual chemotherapy, attached to an intravenous tube that dripped a poisonous substance into my veins. Jarvis described grappling with the fact that he, supposedly a bodhisattva, wanted to kick someone's teeth in, a desire that shamed him. Then he wrote about what happened next. As I breathed slowly in and out, absorbed by my anger toward Bork, I saw all the things I didn't want to see. On the screen between my closed eyes, I saw my own anger. I saw the viciousness of my own pain. I was ugly, shaken, no good to myself. The structure of my face had changed. All the thin frown lines in my face seemed permanent, and the muscles in my jaw were as tight as clenched fists. Then, a bigger feeling broke through as I plugged into all the human suffering throughout the world. Jarvis asked himself, why hadn't I seen Bork as part of it? Why hadn't I seen myself as part of it? When I did, I felt a mental clarity that lifted me above all the clouds of my own making.
I wanted to share that clip with you for a couple of reasons. Number one, talk about dealing with an asshole at work. Here you are, living together, a great chess partner, and then finding out what this person's crime was. And it angered Jarvis so much that he wanted to kick his teeth in, right? So even people with 20 years of meditation experience get triggered, right? And this is an extreme example. But a couple things come out of this. Number one is the anger, whatever your asshole is doing for you in terms of bringing things up for you, this becomes something to train with. We don't come to the cushion to turn away from that or get comfortable with it or pretend it's not happening. We come to the cushion, we work our Zen practice intentionally to face into the difficulty of life. Because if we don't, it just lingers like tiny black ninjas hiding behind shrubbery, and it will continue to come out and get us. So the cushion is a safe place to confront whatever that asshole at work is bringing out in you. But the second reason I share this is because when Jarvis was able to get down, 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 he could see that the ugliness, right, the suffering in Bjork was so similar. It was the same suffering that he himself had felt, and a little bit of Jarvis's backstory. And he had gone through a terrible, horrible upbringing as well. And he really had to work hard on the other assholes in his life, some of whom were his parents, you know. So we come to the cushion to face these things, to face this asshole, but even more to face the energy behind that asshole. The asshole is just the personification of whatever it is you need to face. And for that reason, at least for myself, when I'm dealing with an asshole at work, I am so grateful because now they are giving me another opportunity to practice. In fact, I have a really difficult client right now. And I was catching up with my bio mom recently, and she was like, you know, how are things going? And I said, I've got this great opportunity for Zen training right now at work. Just the best, the best. So grab a piece of paper. Grab a piece of paper at the top or in a clear space where you've got some runway. Write down the name of the person or the situation where you experience that asshole. And I'm going to put the fear tree back up because it's going to be a good reference for us. There it is, the fear tree. Okay, so you've got the name of the person and the kind of maybe the triggering situation. For those of you who are coming into American Thanksgiving next week, Thanksgiving can be very triggering with in-laws, outlaws, and so forth. Okay, so you've got this written down, and I'm going to ask the question, and you just write it in your notebook. So what? What impact does this have on you personally? What impact does this person or this person situation have on you personally? Next question. What do I fear may be true about me? What do I fear may be true about me? Okay, holding that answer. Next question. So what? So what? What does that lead to? What if that is true? So what? And keep asking yourself, so what? So what? So what? Until you might come to one of the roots on this tree. I'm going to keep going. Now I'm assuming you're in one of the roots of the tree here. Not strong or powerful, not good enough, not safe, not liked, not authentic. And we're going to start from the root and work our way back out, okay? So looking at that one word or those phrases that really seem true for you, focusing on the root, the next question is, how do I sense when I've had enough of this? When I've had enough? Meaning, what gives you enough safety? What is the sense you have when you're safe enough, when you feel good enough, when you feel strong enough, etc.? If you're drawing a blank on this, you may have an unfillable need here. And a lot of people do. You're not alone. You're not alone. So just kind of maybe circle that for yourself. Now take a big breath. Really relax. And feel into this root at the base of the tree, whatever your root issue is. And imagine moving into that root. Become that fear. And then feel into where that fear shows up in your body. It will be somewhere in your body. It might be a tightness, a heaviness. And put your breathing there. Put your breath into those places in your body where this root really has you. Keep deep breathing, breathing deeply. Now, acknowledge this fear. Accept it. It's a fear operating in you. Maybe it has a long story, but notice the awareness with which you see the fear. The you that is just looking at this fear is not afraid. Rest in that awareness, just the awareness that this fear exists in you. Now, final question or final nudge. Neither fighting nor fleeing, but being this fear. If this fear had no power over you, what would be your best way forward in this situation? If this fear had no power over you, what would be your best way forward? When we're dealing with an asshole at work, we are really dealing with our own anger about a person or a person in a situation. And that anger creates a mirror that we can train against, that we can work with. Why are you angry? Why are you angry? When we deal with assholes at work, many of us try to change the asshole. Wrong move. Wrong move. This is the mirror moment. We get to take this as training for ourselves. Where is this anger really coming from? This anger is usually coming from fear. And if we can get down into the fear, if we can even embody the fear and realize this isn't an actual tiger, this is a paper tiger. This fear is a story that you're telling yourself, maybe from 50 years ago, right? This isn't a real tiger, this is a paper tiger, right? So if we could crumple that paper tiger up, light it on fire, what would we do with our energy? If our energy dealing with this asshole at work wasn't spent making the story about them or feeling the anger, if we could actually use this to do something more generative, we could help face our own fear and we could move from a place that is fearless. Move from a place that is fearless. So that is our bridge to activism. Fearlessness is our bridge to activism. This is not the same talk, dealing with an asshole at work and building the body of an activist or building a body for change. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing, but they're linked. They're linked. And if you want to be a good activist, and I'm not talking about the kind of activist where like you're writing a letter to your congressperson or you're sending a check to your favorite charity. That is safe activism. That's definitely doing something. But we have with us today an expert in true activism, standing toe to toe with cops. People who are protesting huge oil and gas companies around the world where it is really not safe to do so. That person is Kate Waters. So, Kate, I want to open the floor to you. I want you to, if you would, a brief bio about yourself. I realize we're running up on time, but a brief bio about yourself. And I'd like to talk with you, kind of interview you a little bit about some of the things we talked about last week. So why don't you introduce yourself to these folks?
Okay, thank you. I'm Kate Waters, and I am a student of Zen, and I'm also the co-founder and director of an environmental and human rights organization called Crude Accountability. And we work primarily in the Caspian and Black Sea regions, although we do some work in the United States as well, with communities that have been impacted by oil and gas development. And when I say communities, I mean that in a really broad sense of the word. We work in small communities that are like on the front lines. In the US, we use the term fence lines, like people who are right up against the whatever it is, the refinery, the pipeline, the field, people who are impacted by the decisions that are made by governments that are getting rich off of this revenue. Oftentimes in that part of the world, they are authoritarian regimes. So we work in places like Central Asia, the Caucasus, Russian Federation. When it was still safe to do that, we can't work inside Russia anymore, unfortunately. And so we try to facilitate change that communities need for themselves, they want for themselves. We try to shed a light on some of those stories, and we try to work on the international level to help to provide capacity and also to advocate within international institutions for the human rights, environmental, social rights of these people who are on the front lines and often don't have access to a lot of information for a lot of very complicated reasons. So that's a crappy elevator speech, but that's sort of who we are. in a nutshell.
What I will tell is that Kate is the only person I've known who, when we've been training in the dojo together, like just during training, like an Institute for Zen Leadership class or something, she has literally been like taking a break to try to move somebody out of like a region where they might die into like another region. So like the life or deathness of some of what Kate does is was very real to me. I experienced it myself. Kate led a master class for the Institute for Zen Leadership last fall. She led a session on the body of an activist. You know, what do we have to, what is the body of an activist? And one of the things I took away from that is that activism starts with the body, not with words. And boy, that speaks to the Zen of my experience. You know, how my body is how I am. So, Kate, we talked a little bit about the fight, flight, fear. You know, that, you know, when a person is confronted with something drastic, maybe they're marching for something, or, you know, they're standing up for something, and things start to get a little dicey. Fight, flight, fear is what an untrained person would do. But can you tell us a little bit about how you train your folks, and what's the alternative?
Yeah, I mean, fight, flight, fear. I mean, freeze is the human
I'm sorry.
reaction
Yep.
to stress, right? To trauma. It's what we all do. It's that little reptilian part of our brain that's saying, "Run from the saber tooth," like he's right there. And you know, and we talk about it in terms of being prepared for what we're going to do, having thought through, thought through basically what we're going to do, thinking through like what the steps, what are the possibilities, what are the eventualities. In Zen, we talk about it as training, right? We train. We're not just, we don't just have a calm reaction when we might have, 5 years ago spun off into some place, and that the spinning off, as your story told, still happens. But it's not just thinking through what's going to happen, but being prepared for eventuality, and being prepared in the body for what might happen, and having a sense of what are my limits, right? It's not about, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this thing, and it's a lot of bravado or ego. The ego has to go away, because you're only as safe as you are capable of being in a moment. You can't control everything. And the other thing too, and I think Black Lives Matter and a lot of the protests and sort of movements in the US in the last couple of years have done a really good job of recognizing that we are often not the most vulnerable of those who are in this crowd, right? So the people who are the least vulnerable need to really think about what, and feel into what are they willing to do, what is their capacity to do, and what does that mean, what does that mean,
Yeah.
and then live with that and be with that, knowing that we can't control everything, and being prepared for that as well. It's
I
breathing,
really
it's
appreciate,
standing.
yeah, it's standing, it's breathing. Kate, tell me what you think about this. I put this chart together after you and I talked when I didn't know you were going to be here.
Mhm.
Um, but so activism starts with the body, not with words, but the embodied difference between fear and fearlessness. And so fear, you know, you talked about like contraction. Let's just start there. Like Kate, you said like your eyes narrow.
Mhm.
Instead of like in Zen, our eyes widen, right? You talked about fight, flight, freeze. And we talk in Zen, like Jimmy, I'm thinking about karate, when we do Tai Chi, that in Zen, the fearlessness is having the ability, complete flexibility to move in whatever direction is needed at every moment, right? You just talked about like you're prepared when you go toe to toe on a line somewhere versus being unprepared. If this is your first rodeo or you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be unprepared and fear can take over. The notion of fear comes from an undisciplined reaction versus fearlessness from a practiced reaction. We see this in the military. right? Where you go through theaters of war, you go through drills so that you know what to do when the time comes. Um, Scattershot and strategic. You talked about always having a plan and a buddy, Kate. Like when you go to the line, right? That you have a plan and either you're going to stay with your buddy or you agree on when you're going to break up with your buddy. There's a number you call. There's a kind of identification you don't take along and the kind of identification you do take along. Now these are high. This is high stakes activism. Many of us probably will never do this level of activism, but again, the extremes can teach us something. Um, Fear is being worried about myself. Fearlessness comes from that sense of connection with everybody that you're there with. Fear has also a feeling tone of being frantic, whereas fearlessness comes from this just calm, like sense of moving in the direction that's needed. Kate, what would you add to this, or is there a way that you would put a twist on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's um it's hard to put words to this, so forgive me if it's not super articulate, but I think there's sometimes a feeling that, there's like an aggression that comes with this kind of with activism,
Ah,
with it, or this is not about aggression. This is about having a goal or holding a line or whatever it is. I have a Russian colleague who I think embodies this perfectly. He has been arrested more times than I can count. He's an environmentalist. All he's trying to do is protect green spaces where he lives. And when he is confronted by police or security forces or the governor or whoever it is, most of the times those people are really insecure and nervous because they're filling an order that came from somewhere else. They don't really even maybe understand what they're doing, but they've been told to do this thing, right? This happens a lot in authoritarian um, situations. And my friend stands perfectly still. He has a little bit of a wide stance. His hara is like, he is like boom in his hara. He doesn't speak while they're speaking. He doesn't ever interrupt. He waits. He's silent. He's still. He's calm, deep water. And it has a very, it takes people off balance, like, because what they're expecting is the punch back, right? And he just kind of deflects the energy, stands still, receives whatever it is, and then moves on. And to me, that is like the embodiment of the opposite of that frantic, like, I've been told I have to do, rather than this is coming from a place of deep conviction and a willingness to maybe see allies where there I might not have thought there were. So nothing is
mhm.
absolute. That's the other part of it. Um, I don't know if that
That
makes
open,
sense.
just complete openness to connection.
Just
And
wide open
yeah,
to connection. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
if this piece about building the body for change, building the body for activism is interesting to you, Kate agreed last week when we didn't think she was going to be able to come to this, that we would do a session on this topic for the online dojo community and do it in a more deep way, do it in a way that it's not one part of the double feature. Um, so I think we'll leave that there for now, just in the interest of time, Kate. I can't wait to collaborate with you further on this. And if anybody has a burning question, I'm very happy to take it now. Um,
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. And what an amazing story ooh, from your partner. I mean, I think one of the things that I have learned over time, and I will say, when I came to IZL, I was burned out. I didn't know I was burned out until I started training, and I realized that I had no capacity, and I was like, I needed my well filled back up again. And I thank Zen training and Ginny Whitelaw and IZL and Chose Zen and the virtual dojo and all of it, because I feel like my well has been filled back up. But part of what you're talking about is that coldness, which can come, and that's their fear. And when I say receive, I mean receive like a curtain, right? It's not going in. I'm not holding that. And I think part of what Zen helps us learn to do is not take that energy and like put it in our heart or our gut or our bones, but it flows through us. And kind of like when you're like, ooh, there might be a ghost or something's creepy in this room, you don't walk out with that in you. It goes through you. And so we feel it, we acknowledge it. But part of the training is to not carry that, to not carry that weight, not carry that fear. It's fear. The reason all of those other people looked away is they were afraid. And this one person thinks that this is their job, is to hold that line, and maybe believes just as strongly as you do in what they're defending or protecting or whatever. And the trick is to let that move through, and maybe there's something in there that is also you, or something in me that is that person too. And if we can find that little intersecting circle of humanity, we just stand and look at each other rather than the tear gas opens or the punch gets thrown or you kick the whatever. That's where the nonviolence comes in. But yeah, so, and that's where the hope comes too, is that we can diffuse that and walk away from it. And it didn't end, nobody had to be hurt in that situation. There are plenty situations, we see them all the time, where that spark gets lit and boom, all of a sudden, punches are flying, guns are shooting, whatever it is. But the ability to, and it's not always in our control, to try and turn that, just shift it just enough so that the confrontation doesn't have to happen.
Mm.
And that's breath.
Katya, thank
That's
you for
breath,
that.
breath, all breath. And a little bit of anger
And
sometimes.
groundedness.
Yeah. I have found in my own experience that a little bit of anger, not like to the point where you're raging out of control, but a little bit of anger, especially, forgive me, but I think for women, enables us to hold our ground in a place where the intent is to intimidate the shit out of you. And if you can just recognize that and be like, God damn it, I have a right to stand here too. That then that flight, that fear, that freeze disappears, and you're like, this is my place on the ground right here. I'm going to stand right here. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So little anger can go a long way. Little anger.
All of our emotions can be useful. They all can be useful, right? What strikes me, Kate, is that, the media images of any kind of confrontation are always the hair trigger, the immediate escalation. So I just think about, like, I'm trying to remember a time when I've experienced what Katya was describing, or when I've experienced what your colleague in Russia has helped co-create in those moments. And I'm kind of coming up empty. We tend to think like you either negotiate it with words and contracts or you act it out with each other on front lines. And so I'm really excited about building, this module with you about this so that our people can feel it in their own bodies, and we can do whatever kind of change making, we feel needs to be done. And you guys, that's not just, social change, but that's like, I have a friend who's a new city manager, and she has to get a budget changed, and she has to be able to stand in front of the mayor and the city council and breathe the longest breath, and just be boom in what she's presenting. Let me close this out. I'm sorry, I'm gonna skip the Q&A. Any more Q&A today? And this again from Jeannie's book, Resonate. Perhaps the greatest gift of Zen and Zen leadership is that we can be fully activated without being angry. We can come from a place of connectedness. We can be a conduit for connectedness that others may feel it more. Fear grows in isolation when we feel stuck in a separate self having a problem. So whatever like wicked problem we're trying to take on, whatever change we're trying to make in our work, connection and fear cannot mutually coexist, right? If you're only in that stuck place of fear, that's when you're going to be having problems with an asshole. Just trace it all down to the root of that fear. But when you can feel connected, try to feel connected to the asshole. Try to feel connected to the bigger principle of what it is we're working towards, like Jimmy was with his colleague. Like, hey, we're all trying to help students learn. You know, Kate's people trying to hold a line, help their communities, right? So that connection, whether it's to purpose or to people, and when you feel that connection, things around you start to change. That's how you know if your training is working. That's how you know if the connection is working, because you will start to see things, people and things change around you, like the person who walks away from the question, right? Or the person who softens, or the person who meets your eye. We got this, assholes at work, making social change. We got this, no problem. Thank you for being together today, and thank you for any support you can give to Chosei Zen that makes these programs possible. Thank you.